In Overwatch, finding a great duo can be one of the most important things to helping you climb. But once you have that duo, what characters do you pick to give yourself the best chance of winning? See, some characters have perfect synergy and they're going to give you a much higher chance of achieving that victory, while others have anti-synergy, and if you lock them, you're actually setting yourself up for failure. But which is which? We're going to break it all down in the Overwatch best and worst duos of Season 10, but I'm on a mission to get to 100,000 subscribers before 2025, and if you enjoy my content or if you want to see all my other Season 10 guides that are coming really soon, you're definitely going to want to smash the subscribe button, and let's get right into it. Now, the first duo that I think is fantastic for ranked, especially if you are both support mains, is a Ana Brig Duo. And this is what I would call the Protect Duo. And mainly, Ana is struggling a lot this season, primarily because she's getting left behind with no mobility, she is getting targeted, and she is getting killed a lot. And Ana doesn't really have the means to defend herself by herself up against multiple targets, and that's where Brig comes in, and that's why this is the perfect Protect Duo. Because an Ana with a Brig together just becomes basically unkillable by 2, 3, 4 people at times, and really, you can change an entire fight with this duo if you can recognize the advantage and disadvantage of your team to the enemy team and the ability trades that have been going on. Like, as an example, let's say you're Ana and Brig, and you're just sitting there outputting lots of value to your team, and the enemy team has gotten a lot of picks on your team, and they overcommit onto y'all. Well, all of a sudden, a nanoed Brig, or a Brig rally, or a nade into a swing, or a whip, out of nowhere, enemies could feed into y'all and just start getting destroyed. Like, Ana Brig together can sustain against any singular source, basically no matter what. And oftentimes you can beat the numbers disadvantage with this synergy because it's just that powerful. Now you might be saying, okay, well, then they're not going to commit to us anymore, Mills. They're just going to stay back. They're going to stay away. Well, this is actually really good for a couple of reasons. The big one being that Ana is going to be completely freed up to be a character that gets to carry fights. Like, there's a lot of games where if an Ana is uncontested, she's just going to hard carry a game, and most of the time, people will contest that Ana. But in this situation, you are super disincentivized from even messing with the Ana, and then eventually the Brig can play a little bit off the Ana and try to get value in other ways because the enemy team aren't targeting her nearly as much, but still close enough that you could Brig bash, double pack, and you're all of a sudden connected again, and you're ready to protect if you need to. So it's just a really strong duo that I think is one of the best support ranked duos that you could just log game after game, and I would highly recommend it, especially if you're not on mobility or a mobility comp. This can be fantastic, great anti-dive, great all around. Highly recommended. Now, the next up we got to talk about is the first bad duo, and I'm gonna say Mercy Lucio. And I've talked about this duo as being bad in the past, but I want to explain fully why it's bad. And I would say that this duo is the not enough X, not enough resource duo. So specifically, you have two support characters that want to get the majority of their value by not healing or enabling healing, right? Lucio wants to speed boost people around and enable those people so that they can get into better positions and make better plays and engage faster at a faster tempo. Mercy often wants to damage boost and often wants to create better breakpoints for her DPS so that they can take aggressive angles and they can do more damage and get actual confirmed kills. So that's what both these characters want to do. And while a lot of supports do want to do damage and can, these two characters have kits that are designed more towards their enabling side than towards their healing side. As in, if you're playing a composition, and most compositions need a certain minimum threshold of healing, these characters can't really provide it unless you encourage bad behavior from them, right? The Mercy is going to be pocketing the freaking main tank, right? She's going to be following them around with the heal beam. You don't want to do that. Lucio is going to be amping up his freaking heal, and then you're not getting the speed value. So you're either letting all your teammates die over and over again, or you're setting these characters up to fail by making them play in a way that is not the best for them to actually climb and get value with. Now, can you play this support duo in some situations? Actually, yes, but it's going to depend on a couple of specific factors. So you got to think about it. If the problem with these characters is that there's not enough healing resources because they don't want to do that, they don't want to play that way, then a comp that doesn't require that at all could actually be somewhat viable, right? So like, as an example, if you had a Wrecking Ball and maybe a Sombra and then a Echo or a Pharah, that's an example of like, hey, the Mercy could stay with the Flyer, and then the Sombra can be pretty self-sufficient, and so can the Ball. Like, that's an example of it may be working. I'm not saying it's most optimal, but that would be better than a super greedy, resource-hungry composition like a Zarya-based Cassidy composition. All of a sudden, you're never going to have enough resources, and you're going to lose the game without even really understanding why. So it's important to understand that that's the reasons why this comp doesn't work most of the time. Doesn't mean it can never work, but it's part of the reason why the composition struggles so much in a lot of situations. People in ranked need resources. They're greedy. They don't engage perfectly. You need a higher floor threshold of healing most of the time, and that's just how it is. But moving on to number 3, let's talk about a good combo, and this is another protect duo, but a little bit different: Roadhog and KIRO. Now, the reason that this is so good is that a Roadhog is a character that can just be really hard to deal with without counters or specific things that are targeting him. And once you get those things into your roster, KIRO can neutralize a lot of that and apply extra pressure to the characters that are trying to shut down the Hog. And I really think that if you are linked up really disciplined like Roadhog and KIRO, you can make that Roadhog a menace. But this duo can be a little bit tricky because you need a bit of faith on the Roadhog side that the KIRO will come bail you out of some riskier situations where you're trying to go for higher value plays, higher value hooks. And the KIRO needs to be disciplined with their utility so that they don't get their TP and their Suzu forced too early, especially when the Hog is engaging. It's really about how the Hog engages and at what time. Like, if they're off sync, then it will be really obvious that they're off sync. On and break, a little bit easier to set up because you're literally just playing together, sitting on top of each other the vast majority of the time, especially if there's enemies that are going to dive onto you or target you. But with Roadhog and KIRO, y'all can try to get value apart from each other, but y'all ultimately have to always have each other in your mind. The Roadhog needs to make sure that they aren't going for something really aggressive when the KIRO has gotten their cooldowns forced, and the KIRO needs to play relatively safe to the point where they're not going to get their cooldowns forced at the same time that the Roadhog is going for a play. It's a really strong duo if you could set it up right, but I would say it's a level above the on a Brig Duo as far as the need of synergy and the need of communication, because if you're not on the same page, then the Hog is going to go for something a little too aggressive, feed and die. The KIRO is not going to be able to save them, and the whole plan is going to fall apart. And you can even encourage your Hog to feed if the timing isn't right. The next up, we got to talk about a bad duo, is Sigma and Genji. And this is another one that I cite a lot as being an anti-synergy duo. And it really comes down to what is the predominant strategy of a character. Like, what do they do and what do they like to do? And for Sigma, he likes to control space by applying damage and pressure. He likes to slowly encroach on his territory by shielding and damage and pushing up. And he likes to poke, basically, a lot. And that's mainly what he wants to do. Genji, while he can poke, what does Genji want to do? He wants to get in. He wants to dash, he wants to kill, he wants to dash again, he wants to kill, he wants to go in and go crazy, right? But the big problem here, and the reason that it's anti-synergy, is that Sigma isn't baiting out the same cooldowns that Genji wants to get baited out for him to engage. So, as an example, if you have a character that goes in hard and goes in aggressive, they're going to bait out a lot of cooldowns. They're going to bait out Nade, Sleep, Suzu, Lamp. Maybe they'll bait out Bubbles. Maybe they'll bait out, like, Mei Ice Block. Whatever the case may be, all these defensive cooldowns, they're going to bait them out. And then Genji is more freed up to engage with that. And also the pressure that is being created inside the enemy team can be a guise, like a mist, for Genji to operate and do damage without being targeted, right? Sigma's never really going to do that for you. He's going to whittle things down slowly. So you can't basically engage as a Genji until those things get baited out naturally, right? The enemy's cooldowns get baited out naturally and all that stuff. But here's the problem, and let me use the Sigma v Sigma mirror as an example. When you're in a Sigma v Sigma comp, what is the team that baits out the enemy cooldowns more? That's right, it's the team that is winning the fight. If you are winning the fight as a Sigma, you're going to be baiting out more cooldowns from the enemy team. The enemy Sigma is going to be backing up. Enemy supports are going to be using cooldowns, right? But here's the problem. If you have a Genji that is far worse at poking than a DPS on the enemy team is at poking, then the enemy team automatically has an advantage in the poke wars. So Sigma is not going to be able to bait out those cooldowns unless the team is winning, but you're at a huge disadvantage in the Sigma fight because you have a Genji. And then Genji's bad because you're never going to have those cooldowns baited. You kind of get the idea. That's just one example, but it showcases the anti-synergy of characters that want to operate on completely different play styles and with completely different strategies. And yeah, I'm not saying that you can't get Genji to work, but it's going to be much harder. You're going to have a much tighter tighter window to get things done. You're not going to have anything to bait out your cooldowns or anything like that. So you would have to be playing at a much higher level to get value, or your team is just better and they're winning the poke war up against the enemy team that maybe has a better comp than you, a better poke comp than you, but they're just not playing it well enough to where your team is still winning the fight, and then you're going to find these openings with Genji and, you know, you go crazy. But that is not because the enemy team is playing correctly or well, or maybe the enemy is playing an even worse comp than you with even worse anti-synergies, but we'll talk about that a bit later. Now, the next characters that we have on the list in the good tier is Tracer plus Sombra. And I'm going to call this duo the Double Trouble. Basically, two characters that want to do similar things. So they want to pressure similar things. Now, I know that Tracer can do a lot of different stuff than Sombra can, and of course, Sombra can hack and apply pressure in certain ways, but because of the duo itself, sometimes the playstyle changes. As an example, a Sombra that might be alone might focus more on hacking the front line, trying to disable certain utility from the enemy tank, but with Tracer, all you want to do is pressure the same character at the same time, put them in a situation where they don't have time to react, you kill them very easily and quickly, and because you're both applying pressure to them, oftentimes you can eliminate a target with less resources collectively. Like, a Tracer might need to use 3 blinks and a recall to kill somebody, but with the Sombra that starts it with a hack and a virus plus the Tracer might not even need to use a recall and maybe only 1 or 2 blinks, which means that y'all can then go for another person and create another play because you still have resources in the bank. This is a really, really strong duo, and you can do this with dive characters, you can do this with poke characters somewhat, you can do it with brawl characters, of course. But really, there's 2 important factors that can make this a great duo that works amazingly, or it just doesn't work at all, and it really comes down to setup and timing. You, of course, want the timing to be perfect with each other, right? The Sombra goes in right as the Tracer goes in, or whatever 2 characters it is, you want to time that identically. But the way that you're going to realistically do this is with setting up or getting someone to set up and wait for the other person. A Tracer set up in a location where just around the corner is the enemy, but they're waiting there crouched. Or a Sombra waiting there invisible, waiting for the Tracer to catch up. The second the Tracer can engage with high cooldowns, you don't want that Tracer to have to triple blink across the map to catch up to you. You want to be able to actually have that Tracer have all their cooldowns when you're engaging the same target at the same time. If you can do that, then that singular target is just going to die very easily. But you need communication. You need to be always thinking about what resources your teammate has, and you need to make sure that you're constantly keeping up the comms, saying, can I go? Can we give a countdown? 3, 2, 1. I can't go. I can go. You know, you're giving these active pieces of information to your partner so that it actually works, instead of, you know, y'all being completely out of sync, and then it's just gonna basically fall flat. Now, the next duo that we got to talk about is another DPS duo, and it's bad, Junkrat plus Widow. And you can definitely play this combo and get it to work, but it primarily is just both sides popping off individually and not together. Like, having a Widow trying to follow up Junkrat damage is very difficult, and having a Junkrat follow up Widow damage is just not realistic. You're gonna find this a lot where it's characters that they could still be played on the same composition, but they would never synergize with each other unless, like, the stars align. And most of the time, this is not a duo that I would suggest you rocking if you're looking for a duo partner and you're trying to climb. Like, as a Junkrat player, you don't want to be grabbing a Widowmaker player as your secondary DPS, and as a Widowmaker player, you definitely won't grab a Junkrat player as your second DPS, because who would duo with a Junkrat main? Just joking. Now, before we break down our last 4, it says only 20% of you are subscribed, so if you haven't subscribed, do me a favor and smash that subscribe right now, and let's get back into it. And the next duo that I do like to talk about is a Zarya plus an Ana. And I would call this a resource hog duo, mainly because Zarya is a character that requires a lot of resources. And if the Zarya is given those resources, they can pop off far harder than they would be able to without it. So if you have a Zarya main, they really want a support that can constantly keep them up and enable them to just be better and better and kind of just like destroy the entire team. Like a Zarya that's left unchecked with a lot of resources can be an absolute menace if they're good enough. And the Ana could even do things like nano the Zarya and further that momentum, and y'all can snowball Grav into nano, into Grav, into nano, and it's super, super strong. Plus, because the Zarya is taking over and is applying so much pressure, they can always peel for the Ana if they need to, but really the Zarya is going to be able to just apply such heavy pressure out, and if you can time the engagements of Zarya and the Zarya's resources to the Ana's abilities, Ana's nade, Ana's heal amount, making sure that y'all are never in a situation where the Zarya is pushing when the Ana is reloading, or reeling or doesn't have cooldowns, whatever the case may be, you can make it so that you enable that Zarya much more. Now, I will say that if you are the Zarya in this duo, there's a lot of burden on you to perform because you're getting extra resources where you wouldn't get that otherwise, and that's costing your support, you know, the ability to enable other people, right? So I would say you don't really want to rock this duo unless you're very confident in the person that you're enabling, and make it so that you're flexible enough to swap compositions or swap duos if the main person that is being enabled gets shut down, because then you're dumping all these resources into someone that is not getting enough value to justify it. Now, I do want to throw together another anti-synergy example, and I'm going to say Sigma Lifeweaver. This is a very different example than the Genji one, where Genji wants to go in and dive. This is a situation where Sigma is going to rarely be in a position that requires him to get pulled out, and that's the only way to save him. And Lifeweaver is very poor at poking in the neutral, so you have a situation where the characters just don't enable each other particularly well. And while Lifeweaver could probably slot into a Sigma composition and you wouldn't really notice anything terrible or atrocious unless the Lifeweaver was like pulling you completely out of fights, if that Lifeweaver was any number of other characters, the synergy would be in place and much stronger. So it's a power level problem and a synergy problem. So yeah, that's just another example reinforcing the anti-synergy archetype, but I think it's important to understand. Next up, we do got to talk about a good duo, and I'm going to talk about Widowmaker Pharah, and I'm going to call this the counter checker. So basically, when you're playing Pharah, there are certain characters that you're really scared of, you know, certain hit skins that could be problematic. I would say Echo and other Widows are like the worst characters for you, but if you have a Widow that can diff the enemy Widow, then you're freed up. And Pharah can play in an angle that applies extra pressure to the enemy Widow, conking her, applying pressure, making it easier for your Widow to win that duel. And the idea behind a counter checker duo is that you have two characters that can deal with the thing that counters you. Because as an individual, it's really easy to get countered, right? You can get countered all the time, and it can be very frustrating. But having a character that can deny the character that they're swapping to counter you means that you're freed up to do what you want to do. And sometimes characters just have a synergy in the fact that they deny each other's counters. Like, a great example of a one-way street counter checker would be like if you're Widow and then you have a Brig, right? And the Brig is keeping her eye on you so that if you get doped by a Sombra, she's packing you, she's whipping the Sombra, and now the Sombra is going through these cycles and not killing you, and you're freed up, right? You're not dying. That's an example of a counter checker, a one-way street. But an example of a two-way counter checker is, let's say that you are Genji and your teammate is Widow, and the enemy team has a Widow and they also have a Pharah. You can't do anything to the Pharah as Genji very reliably, but your Widow can, and as Genji you can dive the enemy Widow, so you're countering that person, so the Widow doesn't have to worry about it, and the Widow is countering the Pharah, so you don't. So that's an example of like a cross counter. Y'all might not be on the same page, but y'all are enabling each other to not get shut down. Now, the last type of duo I want to talk about is an example of not a good or bad duo. It really is going to depend on the context, and the one I put here is Mercy Winston. And we just talked about how if a Mercy has to heal a Winston, that's really bad, but you got to understand that you and your duo partner could be locking Mercy and Winston, but if the Winston is jumping in with like a Tracer and you're on Mercy pocketing an Echo, pocketing a Sojourn, pocketing an Ashe, then it's perfectly fine. So it's characters that they can be enabled or they can fit into a composition even if the duo themselves doesn't synergize. So it doesn't mean that there's any anti-synergy going on. In fact, you could build a really great composition. You're just pieces of that composition. Even if on paper, Winston, Mercy, oh, they don't synergize. That doesn't matter because Mercy's trying to link up with a DPS that could synergize with Winston, and Winston is trying to do his own thing. He's trying to do his own strategy, and it really depends on the characters around him. So that's just an example of not necessarily no synergy, but not necessarily synergistic. Depends on the context of the composition. But anyways, these are 10 best and worst duos that I have for you for Season 10. Definitely let me know if I missed the mark on any of them, or if there's any duos that you would highly suggest, or highly suggest people not lock in your freaking games. And smash that subscribe button if you enjoyed the content. Thank you so much for coming by. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.